Hi everyone, my name is Ben Tarbox. I would like to welcome you to this webinar presentation brought to you by Maxisafe. Really appropriate timing as we head into summer where hydration, health and performance is going to become a bigger factor in terms of workplace safety. So great timing. Thanks for Maxisafe for doing this. A little bit about us. Myself, Ben Tarbox, I'm the General Manager here at Aqualyte. I have a background in sports science and a previous life, primarily dealing with more high-performance sport before coming on and taking on the GM role here with Aqualyte, where I'm in control of operations and our own production facilities here in Bibra Lake. So we've sort of looked at trying to secure complete control over our quality control and supply over our product, which we've done with setting up our own production facilities. Dr. Graham Bates, he will be presenting today. Very interesting chap. In any organisation, there's probably the brains behind it and then the brawn. Unfortunately, I'm the brawn and he's the brain. So he's the creator of Aqualyte, extensive history in occupational medicine, best described as a medical physiologist who I suppose has specialised in occupational medicine, consultancy and research. Through the 1990s, he was probably involved in most of the major Australian mining companies in helping to develop safe work practices and monitoring and management of their workplace safety rules and regulations, particularly in and around hydration and the impact that that was having on workers' health. In addition to that, he was an academic for 28 years, studying or teaching physiology, pathophysiology, ergonomics and occupational health and safety, along with supervising numerous postgraduate students in their PhD research topics, as well as researching himself. His own research heavily focused on understanding and monitoring and measuring environmental conditions and how they impacted human performance, human health and human performance, which is then directly related to worker productivity. Part of this work was his development of an algorithm called the thermal work limit. Essentially, that's taking a variety of measurements of the environment and calculating an arbitrary index which indicates the maximum load or work rate that a worker can perform under certain conditions before which their core body temperature would rise and compromise their performance. Really interesting research, really interesting sort of outcomes in terms of helping to or using this index to help workers and companies to develop safe working in the heat practices. This work, in addition to his other research, led him to becoming quite internationally recognised in the field of environmental management and heat stress. This was also picked up through the UAE, United Arab Emirates, where he went up there and validated this research and was critical in helping them to develop the legislation around safe work practices in hot environments. TWL is a topic in itself. Plenty of information on that. If you are interested, I would suggest for you to reach out to Maxisafe. They're more than happy to provide you with his direct contact details. Hydration is a multifactorial sort of approach in terms of developing safe work practices. It will be, so for today's presentation, we will be focusing primarily on hydration, but for any other information, you're welcome to contact us a little bit later. So following that, I would, just prior to Graham taking over, I would like to do a welcome to country. So today we come to you from Perth. We acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, the traditional custodians of the land in which we are gathered today. We pay our respects to the elders of the Noongar Nation, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all the people present today. On that, I would like to present to you Dr. Graham Bates. Oh, I do apologise. So a little bit of housekeeping. The presentation will last about 20 minutes. Please add any questions you have to the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We'll answer these questions at the end with what time we do have. And we hope that you're well hydrated and ready to learn all about the importance of hydration. Thank you.
Good morning. It's Graham Bates speaking, and thanks for that introduction, Ben. We're going to be talking about health and hydration and how that combination is going to work out, and also talk a bit about the physiology of hydration. So first and foremost, in terms of gastroenteritis, you lose a lot of fluids. So it's very important to replace those electrolytes when you're recovering from gastroenteritis. Likewise with the flu, you get a runny nose, you lose fluids, etc., etc. Again, Aqualyte or hydration becomes extremely important to the recovery period. Traveling, particularly long haul, I've got a bit of a raspy throat. I had a 9-10 hour flight last Tuesday, 2 days ago, and have a bit of a sore throat as a consequence of traveling for long periods of time in a confined space with very little air. So Aqualyte, or if you like, hydration, you need to maintain your electrolyte balance in the body. In addition to that, your hydration status can offset fatigue by maintaining your electrolyte balance. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides' time. So industrially, we have a big problem with heat stress and heat strain, and hydration becomes imperative in minimizing the effect of that on your work status. Okay, so this next slide is basically the heart of the matter. If you asked nurses, doctors, why do we have to maintain 37 degrees? What's so critical about 37 degrees? The answer is that there are literally, and I mean literally, hundreds and hundreds of chemical reactions going on in every one of your cells in your body. And those chemical reactions, each one of them, of those hundreds, requires an enzyme in order to convert one chemical into another. And those enzymes only work at 37 degrees. So it's the enzymes that markedly decrease or increase your ability to function. So if it goes down to 35 degrees, you lose an awful lot of those chemical reactions. It drops off. It's like a bell-shaped curve. So the minute that it goes 36, 35, you're in a bit of trouble. You've got hypothermia. Likewise, if it goes to 38, 39 and 40, you're basically getting into heat stroke conditions and you've got hyperthermia. So basically, my point is that 37 degrees is critical to maintain your ability to undergo all of these chemical reactions in the body. So the next slide shows high humidity stops or decreases the evaporation of sweat. Two important things occur here. In high humidity, it means that the air is saturated with moisture. So therefore, it's not happy about taking up, or it's very difficult to take up more moisture from your body into the air. And therefore, your ability to lose heat is diminished. And by that I mean that if sweat drips off your body, you're not losing heat. The only way that you can lose heat is through the evaporation of that sweat. It has to go from a liquid to a gas. And in order to do that, it has to be taken up by the atmosphere. If the atmosphere is saturated with fluid already, then that is going to be grossly diminished. So if you stop with that explanation and then start thinking about some of the physiology, that if your decrease in terms of the evaporation, you're not losing heat, so therefore your temperature increases. Likewise, you are losing fluid, but you're not losing heat. So if you're losing fluid, you have a decrease in the amount of blood going to your muscles. So therefore your circulation, increased blood circulation to the skin, is going to have to increase, but if your sweat is going to cause a lack of blood, because all sweat comes from the blood, then it's going to result in decreased flow to the muscles. In addition to that, overheating will decrease your alertness and your mental capacity. Okay, so what happens when people work in the heat? As I said before, all sweat comes from the blood supply. So sweat is an ultrafiltrate of blood. It's an ultrafiltrate of blood. So if you increase the sweat rate, then it's going to result in a low blood volume. It's going to go down. In other words, hypo. Hypo means less than. Iso means the same as. Hyper means more than. So here we've got hypovolemia, a low blood volume. So if you get a low blood volume, what's that going to cause, and what's that's going to result in? Well, the first thing is that thirst, and remember this, it's a very important factor, thirst only starts at 2% dehydration of body weight, 2%. So you're not thirsty until you've lost about 2% of your body weight in fluid. So you've got to do a fair bit of sweating, and then you're going to start getting thirsty. So if you start by 2%, you're going to take an awful long time to recover from that loss. How much do you sweat? Well, sweat rates can reach up to 1 litre an hour, 1 litre an hour. So you drink small amounts and often, programmed drinking. So sweat rates can last for up to 1 litre an hour. And I'll come back to that point in a few slides' time. We've done the research to actually back up this statement. Typically, about 40% of workers come to work dehydrated or hypohydrated, which is not necessarily dehydrated, but they're hypo, less than ideally hydrated. So you've got to drink plenty of water before coming to work. And again, in a couple of slides' time, I'll illustrate more about that point. The idea is to aim to clear something like about 4 times a day you have to urinate, and you should be looking at straw-coloured urine. So drinking is absolutely vital to increase your rate of urination, and 4 times a day would be absolute minimum. Okay, so the impact. Well, some of us would have already concluded that if your blood volume, or if you become hypovolemic, then obviously you have to there's less blood available to go to the skin. If there's less blood going to the skin, then your ability to sweat, given the fact that all sweat comes from the blood, then your ability to dissipate the heat is diminished. It goes down. Excuse me while I hydrate. Your heart rate will increase. So if your volume is lower, then your heart rate has to increase in order to compensate for that hypovolemic state. So people that get a little bit of heat stress are going to have a very high heart rate. So less stroke volume, in other words, a stroke volume is the amount of beats, 1 beat, the volume in 1 beat of the heart, or the left ventricle. That's going to result in excessive fatigue. So your heart rate will increase, your stroke volume will decrease, and therefore you will get fatigue. Blood supply to the gut is also going to be reduced. Remember that when you drink or when you consume fluids, it's going to go into the stomach, and from the stomach it gets absorbed, and it then has to be uptaken into the blood. So if your blood supply is going to be compromised, then your blood supply to the gut is also going to be reduced, and therefore you're going to get a decrease in the fluid absorption. Less blood is available to supply working muscles. That's pretty important, and that's the reason why, as Ben said, he's been heavily involved in elite sport. Hydration is a very, very important factor in all professional athletes and their sport, because of the fact that if you do not have an adequate blood supply, then you're going to have a diminished supply to the working muscles. And so athletes are very, very aware of the fact that they have to maintain their fluid balance. Mental capacity is compromised because you've got a decreased flow to the brain. And that becomes a very important factor in terms of fatigue and your ability to perform to a maximal state. Now, this slide really is incredibly important, and not only important, but quite phenomenal when you start looking at, remember what we said before, you're not thirsty until you've got 1 or 2% dehydration. So if you look at this figure, you've got, before you even get thirsty, you're going to have something like about a 6-7% reduction in physical work rate. So your ability to work at maximal rate is decreased as a consequence of 1 to 2% dehydration. And remember, you're not even feeling thirsty at this point. So that's a massive, if you look at, again, at professional athletes, then that's a massive reduction in physical work rate. If you go to 3 to 4%, so you're feeling a bit thirsty now, look at that figure, 22 to 50% reduction in work rate, 22 to 50%. And that's for moderate, that's not extreme heat, that's moderate to hot environments. So we're talking about, today we've got about 33 degrees, tomorrow we've got 37 in Perth, so that's a hot environment. So this is not even talking about hot environments, this is a moderately hot, so 32, 33. So mental performance begins to decrease at 2% dehydration, 2%. And beyond that, it decreases proportionately to the level of dehydration. So it doesn't just stop at that, as we've looked at that statement before, 22 to 50% reduction in work rate. So the bottom line to this is that dehydration and hypohydration is the cause of many accidents. And mental decrements also occur, and that means poor concentration. If you're a crane driver, for example, think about poor concentration when you've got huge loads hanging on chains and ropes. So this is the cause of many industrial accidents, is the hydration status. I personally have been involved in a number of mortalities in the workplace, and I can directly say that a lot of those are due to dehydration. Okay. Other factors causing dehydration. As I said to you before, last Tuesday, a couple of days ago, I did a 9-10 hour flight. The relative humidity in that aircraft was about 15%, 15 to 18%. It was a 777, and if you go to a 787, the humidity can go up a little bit more, maybe 19, 20%. But basically, the bottom line is that you're breathing in a relative humidity of 15% air. Every breath that you breathe out, every single one, is 100% relative humidity. So you're breathing in 15%, you're breathing out 100% relative humidity. You breathe on average about 15 breaths per minute. So if you think about that, and when measured this, you lose around about 200 mils an hour in an aircraft. If you're going to be flying for 10 hours, that's a couple of litres. So just from breathing alone in an aircraft, and when you're looking at fly in, fly out workers here in WA and in Queensland and elsewhere, they fly up north in WA 2.5 hours in a plane. Before, when they get off that plane, they're going to be hypohydrated. Okay, so air-conditioned rooms, 20% relative humidity. So if you're in there for 8 hours over a 8 to 10 hour night, in the morning you're going to be poorly hydrated, if not dehydrated. Sore throat are the first signs. So remember that when you go to an air-conditioned room, you're going to be losing a significant amount of fluid from breathing. So how much do you sweat? Well, this shows you from real workers. This is some research that we did. And you can see here that you're going to be losing, on average, 600 mils an hour, on average. Now, some people sweat at a high rate. So, for example, I've measured Rahul Dravid, the cricketer, Indian cricketer. He sweats at 3.5 litres, 3.5. So he's a very high sweat loser. Likewise, Pat Cash, he has a very high sweat rate as well. So this is an average. So 600, you can work roughly on 600 mils an hour. So over a 10-hour day, you can lose up to 6 litres in a day. Now, note on the slide that there is a gradual decrease from hour 1 to hour 6, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So what is that exactly in sweat? What's in sweat is sodium, salt. Salt is a ECF, extracellular compartment electrolyte. Potassium is an intracellular electrolyte, and so you only get about 3.5 millimole per litre in sweat of potassium, but the main thing that you're losing is sodium. There's virtually nothing else in sweat. I repeat, there's virtually nothing else in sweat. So you don't need to replace zinc, magnesium, calcium, or any other mineral because of sweat loss. This slide shows a guy from the Hawaiian Ironman, and you can see the salt on his pants. It's gone down his back, through his pants, and you can see all of the white markings from the loss of sweat, and that is all sodium. That's primarily sodium. He's lost a lot of salt. So how much salt do you lose? Well, note before in the sweat rate, we had that gradually decreasing from hour 1 to hour 6. Have a look at the sweat now. The concentration of sweat has gone up from hour 1 to hour 6. And the sweat is not proportional, directly proportional to the body anatomical region where it's coming from. So your head, your arms, your legs sweat at different concentrations. And the legs tend to have, the arms tend to have a higher concentration than the legs. Why is this? The probable explanation of that is the fact that the sweat glands start fatiguing after a period of time. Salt. There's lots and lots of salt in most of the foods that we eat. So you're sweating around about 13 grams each day, and you may need topping up. A couple of interesting points here. The Romans used to pay their soldiers in salt. That's where the word salary comes from. It's Latin for salt. So salary, or if you like, salt is very important. The British were clever. They taxed salt in India because every single person in India has to have salt every single day. And if you look at the staple diets of anywhere in the world, rice, pasta, bread, we eat bread, that's salt. That's salt and a bit of carbohydrate. Pasta, salt and a bit of carbohydrate. Rice, salt and a bit of carbohydrate. So salt is essential in order to perform. Long-term health effects, kidney stones. About 1 million Australians suffer from kidney stones. Also, cancer of the bladder has been reported recently, probably due to the fact that you haven't got any urine in the bladder because you're dehydrated, and therefore the wall of the bladder rub up on one another because there's no fluid in there to stop that happening. Other possible side effects is when sweat is replaced with full strength cordials, that's very high in salt, sugar, and caffeinated drinks. Now, I'm just going to add one quick word here. Energy drinks are saturated with caffeine. Red Bull, Mother, all of those drinks that they call energy drinks, they're not energy drinks, they're just caffeinated. And caffeine causes diuresis. So you're losing more fluid than what you're taking in. Those drinks, the caffeine drinks, or energy drinks as they like to be called, are absolutely a no-no for working in the heat. Self-pacing is critical in a hot environment. You have to, that's why in the military, you get a lot of people that are paced rather than self-paced, and they succumb to hypothermia because Sergeant Major makes them walk for long periods of time with sacks and guns on their backs, and that is going to cause hypothermia. Workers adjust their work rate automatically, and we all have different rates. Some people are fit, some are not. They can't work as hard, simple as that. And the heart rate seems to be the critical factor. And as Ben said before, if you want any further information on TWL, then please ask and we'll show it up to you. So then, this is the analogy. The summary is the best way to maintain blood volume and therefore your capacity to stay cool is to prevent dehydration or hypohydration by maintaining your fluid intake. It's the same as if your radiator in a car, you top it up. Just imagine if your radiator is not full, then your engine will overheat because there's not as much fluid as there should be going around that engine to take away, dissipate the heat. So that's your analogy. My little test to see if you're dehydrated is to try to spit. And if it dribbles down your chin, you are dehydrated. So if you try and spit and it dribbles down your chin, you are dehydrated. Why Aqualyte? Aqualyte, as we said before, is hypotonic. It's hypotonic. Your body has a concentration of electrolytes at around about 290 to 300 milliosmol per litre. 300. Now, if you're looking at hypotonic Aqualyte, it's got 150, so it's got half the concentration. And fluid is going to go down, and with its electrolytes, down a concentration gradient. So if you've got 300 in the compartment of the body, and you've got 150 going into the gut, it's going to be sucked into the body very quickly. And that's the reason why a lot of elite athletes, particularly AFL, who drink Aqualyte, at half time, they can drink, say, 200, 300 mils at least of fluid, and it's into the body straight away before they go on to the second half of the game. So hypotonic is the critical thing that separates Aqualyte from a lot of other sports drinks. It is hypotonic, and there's nothing else that you need other than the salt and the potassium and a bit of glucose. And that ratio is critically important. Glucose and sodium, they go across the gut on the same molecule. So you absorb one and you get the other one going across for free because it's piggybacking. So it maximizes the fluid absorption rates. And if your gastric emptying is very, very high in terms of quick, then you're going to not feel full. You're not going to feel as though you've got a belly full of fluid, and therefore you can drink more. Stands to reason. Delays the onset of fatigue because it's got glucose, and that glucose is going to be rapidly absorbed and straight into the bloodstream, and that's going to preserve your, shall we say, carbohydrate loadings that you have in your body. In other words, your glycogen. And it avoids weight gain and other health-related issues. The other important thing is that it's got all natural flavors. There's no artificial flavors in Aqualyte. And a lot of these artificial flavors, they give an aftertaste, and it's not a very nice feeling in your mouth. It's got a very scientifically balanced electrolyte concentration. It's not just we've thrown in a bit of salt and a bit of potassium. No, we've done the research, and it's got a very calculated, correct electrolyte balance. It's less acidic than a lot of other drinks, and that will obviously have benefits to your oral hygiene. And it tastes great. It's non-caffeinated, and it also will aid your concentration and work. And we'll go now to questions. If anybody has any questions, then please, I'll hand you back over to Ben.
No, stay right there, Mr. Bates. Stay right there. Come back this part. Come over here. So thanks, everyone. We've gone a little bit of over time, but I think we've got enough for about 3 questions. There's a number have come through. If we don't get to your question today and you do want to reach out to us, please contact Maxisafe and they will put you in contact. But Graham, is there a limit to how much I can drink of Aqualyte in a day?
Well, it's a good question. The answer is it depends on how much you'll be losing effectively. I would say that a miner, for example, they're working in 10, 12 hours shifts, 2 litres, 3 litres at least of Aqualyte. We're talking about Aqualyte here. We're not talking about fluid. So we're not saying that you drink just Aqualyte. We're saying that you should drink water and Aqualyte, 1 for 1. So 2 to 3 litres of Aqualyte, 2 to 3 litres of water, and that brings you up to the 6 litres that you're likely to lose over the length of a shift. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah. And Graham, there's a couple other products on the market which contain, significantly more vitamins and minerals than Aqualyte as part of their beverage. Is there a reason why Aqualyte doesn't have those in the formula?
Oh, well, you saw the slide, Ben. What comes out should go back in, and you're not losing magnesium. You're not losing calcium. All you're doing is increasing the tonicity of the fluid. In other words, you're causing it to delay the absorption from the gut into the bloodstream. So if you have a lot of these drinks are not hypotonic, they're isotonic, or they're hypertonic, which means that they're going to take an awful lot of time to get from the gut into the bloodstream, and that means that they're going to feel bloated. Okay. So the answer to your question is yes, a lot of these drinks do have extra things. That's a marketing thing. It's not a scientific thing. Okay. It's a marketing ploy. Well, we need to have something that's going to separate us from the others. Let's put a bit of magnesium in there. Let's put a bit of calcium. It's marketing. It's not science.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to do 2 more questions. One relates to the use of an electrolyte beverage. The other one relates to recovery breaks in hot environments. But is Aqualyte safe for diabetes?
Well, from a medical point of view, I can tell you now that some diabetics are very diligent in looking after themselves. But I can't say that that's true for all diabetics, but we're talking about type 2 diabetes here. So some people, if they don't look after themselves properly, then they drink Aqualyte, and they can know if they drink too much of it, that's going to cause a bit of hyperglycemia, and that's not good. Having said that, for those people, and I've done this personally, for some people with type 2 diabetes, it aids them because it's going to prevent hypoglycemia. And I've had athletes that I've given Aqualyte to who are type 2 diabetics, particularly cricketers that I used to work for the New Zealand cricket team. And I've given it to a couple of players who had type 2 diabetes, and one who had type 1 diabetes. And that maintained their glucose concentration very nicely. So the answer is depends on how well they look after themselves. Some people are very diligent, others are not.
Okay. And the last question, and thank you, there's quite a few more coming in, so you've obviously stimulated some thoughts. What are the sort of recommended rest breaks in a hot environment, do you think?
Recommended
rest breaks, work recovery.
That again depends on what we had before. Some people are very fit, very strong, go to the gym, work out, look after themselves. Unfortunately, not all people do that. A lot of people in this country are overweight. So with obesity and et cetera, their work rate is not going to be anything like a fit person who's healthy. So again, it depends on the person, but I come back to the same point as what I had before. It's critical that you allow people to self-pace. If you have people that are working in very hot environments and they're working with a very healthy, fit person, and he's going to want that person to do their fair share of the work, then that's asking for a problem.
Okay. Thanks, Graham. Listen, I think we will need to wrap it up. We have gone 10 minutes over time, but I think there was some really good content there, which hopefully you found interesting. Listen, if there are any questions that you have that have not been answered, then please reach out to Maxisafe. They will get in contact with us, and we'll be able to connect with you to answer anything that you need. So on behalf of us here at Aqualyte, and in appreciation for Maxisafe for creating this wonderful opportunity to share this important information heading into summer, thank you. Stay hydrated, stay healthy.